Good morning, everyone. I would like to invite my guests to join me here on stage. We have Bart Lorang is already here. Stephen Mooney, hi. Gary Whitehill, Dan Kraus, and Jaka Levstek. Good morning, gentlemen. It's so great to have you all here on stage with me. I'm so honored and happy to be here at this great conference, which is also organized by such an awesome team. You've already met three of our speakers here. Allow me to introduce the additional two. Here with me is Mr. Jaka Levstek. He's the CEO of D-Labs and also an entrepreneur and also a mentor at Camp, right? One of the most renowned world accelerators. Yes, thank you. And Mr. Stephen Mooney, you're the CEO of Synoptic Technologies, and you basically help corporations find innovative solutions. You have a platform that helps them with that, and you're also a part of the UK Trade and Investment Global Entrepreneur Program, right? So, hello. Before we start, I would like to ask you a very simple and short question. This is for each and every one of you. What is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word future? So I'll start at that end because you're already warmed up.
Unbridled opportunity.
Forward, probably the word exponential comes to mind, actually, to Gary's point.
Did you say excrement?
Excremental, exponential, no, exponential.
I would say acceleration.
Acceleration?
I would say passion for creating it.
Chaos and fun.
Wow, that's so diverse. So are all your keynote speeches. You managed to mess up my storyline that I had so very nicely prepared here before we started, so I think I'm gonna start all over again. But still, I think most of us here are entrepreneurs and investors, and there's so much going on in this area all the time, but right now there seems to be some changes coming along. So we're all trying to breed a unicorn, but right now I'm a founder, we're founders, and there are also many investors. Right now there seems to be some changes going on in this area. The investments seem to be slowing down. We see down rounds happening, and also biggest players like Airbnb and Uber are being hit with hard regulations. So I think a lot of us are interested in the question: is this unicorn culture coming to an end? Is something else coming along? And I'm looking at you, Bart, because you're also an investor.
Well, I mean, look, the reality is building a business takes a long time. I think if you are not willing to put in a minimum 5 years, don't even start, but budget 10 years. So markets are going to cycle up and down. Just keep obsessing about customer value and the problem you're solving and your purpose and your mission. Don't worry too much about external markets because you can't really control them. It so happens that the private markets are sort of being affected and impacted by public market sentiment, but that's just natural and normal. And just focus on your customers, my advice. Just long-term value.
As you mentioned customers. Jaka, I know your company helps startups and people who come to you focus and recognize who their customers are and use this knowledge to develop their businesses. Do you talk about this changing landscape in terms of customers and in terms of how do you talk about this with the customers that come to you?
That's a good question. Well, I don't think we talk that much about the cyclical nature of investments or the problems or opportunities that come out of that, because I think, as Bart said, is exactly that, right? As long as you focus on your long-term value of your company, you're fine. But there are some, I would say, paradigmatic shifts still slowly starting to occur, and it's probably every cycle is not just about oscillations, so more money, less money, and stuff like that. It's about learning on what we can learn from the nature of every new cycle, right? And it is a nature of the cycle of the unicorn, if you want to call it this last one, is that it just produces an enormous amount of waste, I think, right now. Enormous amount of waste basically by fragmenting the opportunities to a much lesser amount of companies. And that means that, in a way, the distribution of every resource possible just slowly starts to be less and less and less optimal, more expensive, and that's why we see this enormous amount of money being sort of thrown into the market to try to really develop the potential of every one of these companies. So, from our standpoint, what we do in D-Labs essentially is we try just to reduce the risk or reduce the amount of waste that entrepreneurs sort of face in front of themselves. And part of that, obviously, is just in the nature of entrepreneurial, sort of chance or potential failure. But there's a part of that in trying not to play the game the way each and every cycle is to be played, because if you miss your opportunity in that cycle, that means that, well, you just bury your company and wait till the next cycle starts.
And how do you talk to your to the starters that you mentor at CCAM?
Sorry?
How do you talk about this problem with the startups that you mentor?
Oh, well, you focus on what creates real value. I would say more so than try to focus on the KPIs that are being put onto you by investors, because sometimes those would be just done way too prematurely, right? In a way, we all have a bit of a risk to become a cargo cult followers. You know, the story where you just repeat what everything else does without understanding why you actually have to do that. So whenever you find yourself in a system where the KPIs try to define how successful you are, you will start just to mimic those KPIs without trying to find what's unique about your business or about your customers. So we try just to sort of unveil that and say, no, don't try to bend the spoon, just find the truth. That's the whole point. There was a matrix, right? I think
Yeah, we kind of talked about the matrix and before in the morning. What I liked about the discussions before is that is the range of all these topics they included. So it was this kind of, they went from a very futuristic like platform that we will all be connected to right down to the small person. If anyone has anything to add when someone to any answer or to question, just feel free to jump in. But what I really liked about the discussions before is that the whole range. So what I would like to know right now, and then you can hold, you can take the microphone, is do you think that our future is a big platform that we will be connected to and it will suck all the energy out of us and all the knowledge, or is it something else? How do you see this?
Actually, yeah, that's a great question. I would sort of see it as being the opposite. I mean, I think my hope would be that it would. There may be one, or hopefully many big platforms, but I would hope that it's more a question of providing the information and providing resources, like I mentioned, that enable creativity. It's more that we have these unbelievable amounts of data, this amazing amount of interconnectivity. I think that, if anything, opens up more opportunities for individuals and companies to create new things with that. The level of insights is unbelievable, and the question now isn't so much, can we get it? It's what should we get? And as usual, it starts, when should we get that? And where is that point of value? So if anything, I think it hones in more on the opportunities to hone in on more opportunities, sort of in the shorter term. So I don't see any energy being sucked out. I think, if anything, what the big companies will be providing is a stronger platform for creativity.
So if I understand you correctly, you see the bigger companies being like big partners and like mentors of the smaller startups that are coming?
Yeah, I think one of the things that the larger companies have realized in recent years is that we actually need the entire ecosystem. We cannot do it ourselves. Come and go the unicorns. I think increasingly the larger companies look to smaller companies for accelerated innovation, for new takes and on usage of the things that they're actually creating. And coming back to what I was mentioning in terms of platform, increasingly the larger companies want to open the doors to ingest that creativity, to promote that creativity, and use their scale and their sales to help deliver that creativity to new audiences. So,
Steven, you know a lot about connecting innovation with the corporations. Can you please explain a bit how this works? And what's the end result usually?
Well, is it working? Yeah, I might backtrack a little bit just to what you were talking about with the whole concept of unicorns and cycles. I've got a lot of friends from Canada in the oil and gas sector, and they were all boasting about the barrel prices of oil well over $100, $120 at the time. And a good friend of me said, look, markets go up and markets go down, and that's just a fact. And it's the exact same thing within the tech industry. You get waves of investment, you get waves of stagnation, you get waves of acquisition, and usually, well, always they're related but not interchangeable, and that applies to the corporates as well. If you take certain sectors, you look at fintech right now with kind of the disruption of blockchain, usually you take a sector like that where the biggest corporations are resisting, and I would tend to put my money on those technologies are going to break through that. It's happened in the music scene. I mean, you give hundreds of examples of the corporates that resist the change. And eventually it becomes a momentum wave that becomes unstoppable. And I think that's the case right now because we don't have the big banks, for example, adopting and incorporating a technology that clearly has benefits. The role of the corporation within innovation is a tricky one because I often find that with most of the brand name, even tech companies that we know, it's more a marketing spin than it is an actual adoption. Another good friend told me, talking about SAP, which is now perhaps a bit of a dinosaur, but he did say something that stuck with me a long time ago, that SAP doesn't take little steps. It takes great big steps, and it just scoops up all the little steps along the way. And I think the role of corporations on innovation, some exceptions aside, tends to be more about the big steps and the acquisition. And you get the clever ones that are actually not resisting but encouraging the freedom to innovate. If they can do that within their company, they often hold a lot of that IP. Otherwise, they can do that outside of the company, and they have, in down years, the budget to acquire. So they tend to have the cash position now in the down years to do more acquisitions. And that feeds back to the cycle of acquisitions instead of investment. The one final point I'll make on the whole unicorn, I don't know who comes up with these terms. I think the unicorn is one of the more ridiculous ones I've heard in 20 years of tech.
Because it's so unrealistic, probably.
Yeah, perhaps, but you start to see some of them fall apart, and there was a fintech company in London that just blew apart, and it turned out they didn't actually have fixed contracts, which to me, living through the tech bubble of the Valley, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, it just blows my mind that a VC would invest in a company without doing the due diligence on it. So it's all cyclical.
Okay, great. So, if I understand you correctly, our task as entrepreneurs at this moment is just to keep the momentum going, to keep innovating, to be true to ourselves, and to just, I think we're going, Gary, you're holding your mic. Would that be your advice, that we should still keep the power and just keep on going through all of these things that are happening?
I think it's the wrong question. So going back to what we were talking about here, You know, it's one thing to talk about the wave of exponential and the opportunity for change and everything that all of us have set up here in our various capacities. The fact of the matter is, the question to ask is, who owns the pipes? Right? There's a reason where I come from, there's 5 healthcare companies, there's 5 telecom companies, there's 5 agriculture companies, there's 5 whatever. You can have all the connectivity you want in the world, but it doesn't matter if only 5 companies own the pipe. How many of you have heard of Scott Galloway before in his talk called The Four Horsemen? Anybody? Right. I would recommend everybody watch it. It's a perfect example that extrapolates out what Amazon and Google and Facebook and Apple and a bunch of these companies are doing. I mean, literally they want to become the internet. We're going back to literally portals like we had in the 90s. And, you know, the bigger, higher level question to ask, which ties in everything we were talking about, Bart's presentation was about culture, and then we had, you know, a presentation about process. Mine was kind of an intersection of culture, process, and knowledge. And the reason that matters is because any successful person, family, community, company, city, state, nation, or country, it's a matter of culture, process, knowledge, CPK. The thing we always sit here and focus on up on these stages is talking mostly about knowledge, sometimes about process, and very little about culture. And that's why I bring up this point continually about culture, because these pipes are going to continue to be rolled up. All Silicon Valley has become, all this unicorn stuff, all it is about Silicon Valley becoming the Wall Street of the West. That's it. It's all about money on top of money on top of money for the sake of money to make rich people even richer. Period, end. That's it. It's set for very few humans like a Bart, right? There are folks who create great companies that care about value, that have the right shared values, the right culture, and they're not overnight successes. Bart, I guarantee you, will tell you he's not an overnight success. There's 2 ways you make a unicorn. You do a Ponzi scheme, pump and dump, and we're seeing that happen. And that's the majority of what's happening, because the funds are getting bigger for absolutely no reason, because people think we need more money when we don't need more money. On the other hand, what you have is folks who have the shared mission, vision, and values, and it takes 10 years to build a company. The funny part about all of this talk that I find is that the majority of people in the world care about building a less than 10-person business, 10 people and below, and roughly $1 million in revenue. That's the truth, right? And so if we have this discussion about, and with that lens in mind, the majority of these folks, I can guarantee that's what they care about. That doesn't mean you can't have a 5, 10, 20, $50 million company, right? But you're not going to have a unicorn. But that's okay, right? The other side of it, going back to what I said before, was what we need to be talking about is who owns the pipes, and how we can all stand up and come together with the right culture and the right shared values to make sure that as things transition, you know, that's what we're seeing in terms of equality. The powerful are getting more powerful. The rich are getting richer. It's inequality across the board, and the reason that's happening is because only certain people own the pipes. And it's up to all of us, and it's up to all of you to understand and have the courage to stand up and come together and ask for change, whatever that means, because it's different based on region in the world.
What came to mind when I was listening to your keynote speech is, our time just got much shorter. We just lost 20 minutes. What came to mind when I was listening to your keynote speech is, how do you get so many people in the world to align towards one goal? You know, because I know you talk a lot about culture, but culture can also be a hindrance. So what's your view on that?
Well, it once again comes back to, right, I'm a millennial, right? So the millennials and the Generation Z, we are limbically hardwired to change things. Now, having the courage and the self-understanding and the maturity to understand that little voice in your head is a whole different story, right? That's a whole talk about embracing your inner critic and a personal growth story. So, you know, the biggest thing that could be done here, to be honest with you, if I had it in my head, off the top of my head, what I would do is throw up a massive whiteboard on one of these walls and have everybody write down 1 or 2 words that comes to mind of what they believe in. Because at the end of the day, what you'll be able to do is then start to circle patterns, and they'll usually be 5 to 7 patterns, and then you boil those down to 2 or 3 clear and concise statements, and everybody carries those in their pocket or their phone or whatever it is going forward, and then we remember this time as we go forward. You know, it doesn't take millions and millions of people to start a movement. You know, when we started Entrepreneur Week, which became one, you know, the largest week-long event company in the world, it was 3 of us just sitting in a room. Sure, it became a global phenomenon, but you start from the very small and folks who believe what we believe. And I think all of us would believe in the fact that humans in general deserve better. That's, at least from my point of view, what I've been able to boil it down to. How that manifests, that's different from Dhaka to Sao Paulo to Rio to wherever in the world.
So I think Jaka wants to add something.
Yeah, because because what was just said, I think, sort of comes into tune with another outcome or another consequence of you know, living in the era of the unicorn, which is the fact that pipes are one thing. There is a bigger problem in my perspective, at least, and that's people. Because what we have right now is, you know, we are on the verge of, in terms of inequality, it's not just about financial inequality, it's about the people that are able to have the skill sets and the know-how and the talent to actually thrive in this era. And there's everybody else, which, you know, are now joining Uber. And then they'll be replaced by something else in about 2 years' time. So what's happening is that this war for talent, I think, is probably one of the least talked about things outside of Silicon Valley, at least because the notion is that, you know, Silicon Valley will be always able to afford whatever paychecks, whatever talent is going to create, and the rest of the world just lives in this idea or illusion that, well, they're fine because, you know, there's no, I don't know, Facebook doesn't have a development center in Slovenia, so hence I'm okay, right? I'm going to survive. And that's obviously not the case. What's going to happen is that exactly those types of borders, as they get demolished, are going to get more and more painful for an entrepreneur that isn't part of the system already. So to start to think about yourselves not as a one-time entrepreneur that needs to sort of, you know, fit in the existing company with the existing talent, but to think that this is your lifetime job where you need to build a culture of leadership around yourself, not to just retain, but also, sorry, not just to attract, but also to retain the best talent there is out there. That's probably one of the key things that an entrepreneur needs to start thinking about now, because it's going to take it years to develop in any way.
We're already competing with everyone in this world, which is flat.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, we cannot compete with money. So we can compete with purpose, with culture, with values. There are other sort of characteristics or other traits that we can employ to compete or to still be in the game, to be honest. But unless we start to think about them now, we're going to have waste. We're just going to lose the best that there are.
Yes, there's another point. I really like the direction where this debate is going, because I thought we were going to talk about robots, mega platforms, and about artificial intelligence, but it all came down to to human factor, to us being human, to relationships, basically. And one of the biggest relationships that we have also is with that little blue dot that both of you showed in your presentation. And I think, Stephen, you're very passionate about sustainability and about this topic. So what is going to happen in this area? Are we going to have more contact with the nature, or are we going to lose contact? Are we going to be more responsible towards Mother Earth, towards the blue dot?
Yeah, I mean, my previous company that I started was based around the premise of natural capitalism, right? That everything is sustainable or not. There's finite limits to everything that we hold. And I think as we become a global community, that becomes more the case. Right? We are a global village, and we do need to start thinking about everything as we grow in a sustainable fashion. And that's becoming apparent, whereas 15 years ago it wasn't. As you look to the future, I think, I mean, everything keeps coming back down to the people, right? I think from a technology perspective, things will continue to get faster and smaller, right? And challenges for companies becomes greater. You know, my previous company, our biggest challenge was just trying to get people to understand what the web was and software as a service. Now, my current company, I need experts within big data, deep learning, machine learning, I need salespeople, etc. And those become more expensive resources because they're in demand, and there's just not that access to it. I'm thinking about your case where you had 10,000 resumes. And I instantly went in my head, he doesn't have a personnel problem, he's got a data problem, right? Because he's got to filter through 10,000 applications now. So finding ways to let technology help you, but come back to the person, I think, is the key thing, the whole of it.
Thank you. One of the very interesting challenges that I think most CEOs will have in the future years is to coordinate their teams, their global teams. So this is again for you, Bart. What do you believe? How do you think the workplace, the global workplace, will change in the next decade or so? And what will CEOs need to do about it?
Well, I think we're already seeing it change dramatically. I think the notion that you clock in and clock out at 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. is going the way of the dinosaur. I think teams are becoming distributed. Workers are wherever they want, live wherever they want to in the world. We're experimenting with this heavily at FullContact. In fact, we have a policy where you can work remotely 1 month a year, wherever you want. Communication technologies like, email started it, but then like Slack is sort of super popular in the tech world. Video conferencing technology is getting better and better. Now there's holography, right? Holograms and sort of augmented reality. So that sort of technology is enabling people just to be distributed and live wherever they want to live. It's also creating a talent. You don't. I believe the next Silicon Valley is not in Silicon Valley. It's going to just be global, right? It doesn't need to be centered in one geographical location. We can get talent anywhere, and the access to knowledge is pretty much available to everyone. And so that talent can develop very organically through a community that's interconnected. So I think it's be very distributed, highly focused on outcomes, and not sort of clock management.
Thank you. So, a lot of you are talking about humanity, about cooperation, about this sense of self, but this doesn't have a lot to do with competitiveness that we're facing in this everyday business world. So how do you see this, like, kind of these two things align? How can we be human and yet competitive and achieve those goals that we, Gary?
Look, like I said, CPK, culture, process, knowledge. It's culture that supplements the right processes that also have the right knowledge. That's the cake, that's the pie. It's all of it all at once. What we, once again, talk about all the time, and most of what the leadership books are on, is on process, right? And sometimes a little bit of knowledge, but not at the epicenter, is culture, right? And that's really what matters. The difference now with what we're talking about here on the stage is that, sure, we've always had information technology to accelerate intent. The difference is, for the first time, culture is a strategy, period, end. That's really the difference.
I think if I could add to that, from a competition standpoint, it's really about finding a better solution to a problem and deploying that to the mass. And the critical element of that is listening to your customers. And I think so few startups do that right now. They have an idea and they pursue it. And you need to pursue what you think, but you need to be listening. And there's a human element that exists in that that allows a business to compete and grow.
Well, just one thing to note here is that whenever we start to talk about the culture, there is a bit of a trap, I think, that we're seeing many times over, and that is that companies are not companies anymore. They're becoming nurseries, where the job of the manager is to essentially provide every possible toy that the employee needs to have in order to feel well or play well. I think we're lacking the discussion about mastery, on the other hand. At D-Labs, I think we started about 5 years ago. We stole this notion from Kathy Sierra, and she wanted to build. She said that the whole purpose of the first-time product is to create a minimum badass user. So in the same fashion, companies should be aiming to create minimum badass teams or minimum badass team members. And that takes time. That's the problem, right? The culture is great for acquiring new people, but on its own will not create a sense of satisfaction through mastery. So every company needs to design a strategy on how to actually build that. And that's probably the most difficult thing that you have to do today as a manager and leader in your companies. But otherwise, your teams are going to be great for the first year and a half, and then you're going to, where the hell is
Yeah, and the first year and a half is usually the hardest. I can speak from experience here.
Until you get to the second year and a half.
There's always a new challenge, right? So I can see our timer just turned off, so I'll slowly, I have one last question.
One quick one.
Yeah, it is. So I sent this question to all of you by email, and I know you're prepared. So I'll start at this end with you, Jaka. Which are the opportunities that you see today that we must not miss in order to thrive in the future?
Oh, I'll just reiterate, I'll be very quick. So unless you know today in terms of how you're going to acquire and retain the most talented people around yourself, this is going to be the greatest missed opportunity. And it's because it takes you years to get there, regardless of what's going to happen around in the world, this is something you need to start doing today.
So I'd say sort of horizontally the opportunities afforded by location, whether as we've said that be virtual location or physical location. Statistically, we know that about 30% of the Internet of Things represents location opportunities. So I think that's an area rife with interest for startups.
Another friend of mine is an airline mechanic, and he often does this when they're working on noisy planes, and it basically means fuck knows. And that's kind of what I thought when I read your question, is I can't necessarily predict what the future looks like. I think, and that's okay. In some cases, you have to be prepared to adapt and realize an opportunity and pounce on it.
I'm going to give a different answer, but aligned with my talk. I think we're missing out. We could really miss out on just being human. If we bury ourselves in technology, our nose in our smartphones, and then we're going to have implants pretty quickly, we're going to miss out on human connection. That's a pretty big thing to miss out on the next decade.
Yeah, you're going to see, nation states, their borders are going to become transparent. You're going to see certain nations start to absorb other nations, and that's what happens. Just like when companies are small and are about to get disrupted, they just buy stuff. You're going to see that at the nation-state level. At the company level, you're going to see, I fundamentally believe, I said this in my TED Talk 2013, future of the world's 5, 10, 20-person companies that are lean, nimble, resilient. They're going to be semi-permeable as well, and that's what we're talking about in terms of distributed work. And then when it comes to us as humans, my one piece of advice, because everybody basically said most of the higher level trends would be, and particularly in this region, where folks like to read books and magazines and look at all the folks on TVs, don't believe 98% of what you read in a magazine.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Now, we're quite massively behind time, so I can see you've understood how Slido works. We'll play a quick game. One of you has 10 seconds time to answer the top question. Is a leader with no title actually better than a professional with no ability to lead? Who of you 5 is going to volunteer in 10 seconds to answer a question? I'll give you 5 seconds to volunteer. I'll select one of you. 5, 4, thank you. That's you.
Yeah. I think the question is a little strange, but I think leadership is always better. Everybody has the ability to lead, title or not. You can lead through a number of ways.
Thanks a million. That was super sweet and super quick answer. You can applaud if you like. Good. Thank you.